we're seeing 1,200, 1,400 plus today, 1,500 a day last week of active cases with very few dying. I know that they all have underlying medical issues, which I think is a bit hard on these people. They are just basically people in the community, like you and me, and our kids. And some will die with COVID because it's an infection that can kill. But those numbers this year are very much down. And that's primarily because the younger age group still has a good immune system, and very few of them will die.
So this whole issue that you sort of spoke to before about masks, there's been a lot of debate about the effectiveness of masks, what they do, what they don't do, who they protect, who they don't protect. So do they simply keep it in, or do they stop it from getting out? Does it depend on which mask you use? And I don't know whether you're qualified to talk about this, but of the masks that are around, are the cloth ones you make up yourself good, or are the surgical masks that you get from St John's Ambulance or something similar better?
Yeah, look, not uncommon questions, Alan. But primarily the mask stops you from giving it out to somebody else rather than protecting you. It does work both ways, but it's more that you can't spread it to other people. There's a lot of discussion on masks. Last year, it seemed to be that if you made your own, that they were effective. And if you wore the particular, the P5s and ordinary surgical mask, which you can buy anywhere, they were effective. There is a sense at the moment, though, that maybe they're not that effective. And there is a movement now to actually double masks. This is coming through America and Israel. A lot of people now double mask. They're double masked surgically, or they're wearing a cloth and a surgical on top. And some of that is how contagious Delta is, and some of that is the viral load, and some of that is that it's always interesting to know how long you think your mask will last. So it's thought with regular use, a standard paper mask would last a cumulative 8 hours. So most of us would wear it either to the shops or get the car out, or and take it off and put it on. But if you add up a total of 8 hours, you've probably got the maximum use out of that paper mask that you can expect. And you can extend that by wearing 2 masks. And although we're not hearing that here, I think we will. And I think coming in for the next 6 months, there may be a move to double mask, certainly inside. Buses, we're all going to the pubs, we're all going to the theatre, that lies ahead of us. There'll be much more discussion on masking. I very much support wearing masks. At the moment, I wear mine outside as well as inside. And I'm happy to do so. You just get used to it and make sure you keep refreshing it. Either wash your cloth or change your surgical mask. But I said 8 hours is probably reasonable. You are muted, Alan.
Yeah, muted.
It'd be helpful if I press my space bar, sorry. So there are essentially 3 names of vaccines that are going around. That's, of course, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, and Moderna. What's the difference between them?
Yeah, okay. So now we get it's a little technical. Most of you will know this, I'm sure. I'm not here to teach you how to suck eggs. The first one we'll touch base is Pfizer, of which Moderna is in the same category. And Pfizer is also called Comirnaty. And we'll come back to that in a minute. The Pfizer is its development name, and Comirnaty is its brand name, and Moderna is a brand name. So these are what's called mRNA type vaccines. And they are really clever. And a lot of the work done in developing these actually came from Australian research. So we have something we're very proud of. For those that don't know, your chromosomes are made up of DNA, double-stranded DNA, and RNA, which acts as a replicant of the DNA. So if DNA is the book, then RNA is a page of that book. So what you can do with RNA is you can take a page of the DNA and you can change the effect it has on developing cells to make a C19 protein. So this is now used commonly in a lot of vaccinations, and it's proved to be highly effective with the Pfizer type COVID-19 vaccine. So the mRNA is instructing your cell to make a C19 protein, and you can change that RNA within the mRNA vax. If we have a change variant, you can tell your cells to make the variant antibodies. And if we have other diseases, which we're now developing, we can also get the cells to change in relation to those diseases. So not only viral infections, but muscular dystrophies, diabetes. A lot of these illnesses in the future are going to be treated by mRNA vaccines, of which Pfizer and Moderna are that particular variety. Oxford University and Scandinavia developed AstraZeneca. I'll bring it up at this stage. AstraZeneca, again, is a development trade name, but not a brand name. So there has been some discussion that AstraZeneca is not acceptable in Europe if we are traveling to Europe. Remember the days when you got on a plane and flew on the kangaroo route and you were very excited to arrive somewhere? Well, those days will come back, but at the moment, theoretically, AstraZeneca is not accepted. The reason that is that it's not a brand name. So you may have seen on your vaccination record the name Vaxzevria right next to the AstraZeneca. So Australia is still writing now two names on your vaccine passport. They are exactly the same, but Vaxzevria is the brand of AstraZeneca that Europe accepts. And the same thing will happen in America. So don't be put off which one you get. Both are still branded as trade. They're not branded as brand. One they're branded as brand, and it'll be accepted around the world. This is merely a technicality. The AstraZeneca vaccine uses a small piece of a protein unique to COVID-19, and that little piece of protein is put in the vaccine, and that stimulates your body to make a reaction to it. So we're not changing your DNA or your RNA. We're actually putting something in you. It's dead, not alive, can't catch COVID with it, but it's stirring up your immune system to build an immune response to that very small amount of COVID protein that is not active. So a different sort of vaccine. And this is the same as Novavax, and that's maybe another name you've noted. So you've got mRNAs and you've got the AstraZeneca type protein reactive vaccination. They're both highly effective. They both have pretty similar side effects. They both cause clotting issues. Pfizer maybe in the young gives some cardiac issues, but compared to catching the disease, minimal. If you catch the disease, you are 50 times higher running cardiac problems as a young person, and if you catch the disease, you are 100 times more likely to catch the clotting system issue that AstraZeneca has. So what you don't want to do is catch the disease. What you do want to do is have the vaccine. The side effects of these vaccines, I'm sure you all know. Most of you have experienced it, hopefully. Fever, chills, localized pain, fatigue, which I got, muscle and joint pain, headaches, nausea, vomiting, swollen glands, a bit like catching the disease, but it's very controlled. It's your immune system reacting to it. Most people get more response in the first instance, and when they have the booster, most people get very little response. It can be in the reverse. My daughter had a Pfizer, and then 3 weeks, the second, she was particularly ill after the second one for 2 or 3 days, and the rest of her friends weren't. She was, so you never know what's going to happen there. When it comes to vaccination, I'll just keep talking through this, Al. Most of us are going to have to think about a booster. The way we vax, and I'll just draw your attention to hepatitis B vax, which a lot of you have had for traveling. It's a 3-part vaccine done at first day, month later, and 6 months after that. When you have your boosters to adult diphtheria and tetanus, it's a 3-part vaccine. When you have your cover for Gardasil, for cancer of the genital tracts, which most of our adolescents are having now, it's a 3-part vaccine. So to have had the two and to have a booster is pretty routine way we vaccinate. As long as you get over the philosophical position of we've had 3, but other parts of the world have had none, then if you're offered a booster, which I think all of you will be, into the first half of next year, that will depend on supplies, but I'd imagine we're going to have that conversation. But my advice to you is to take the 3rd immunisation. It doesn't matter if you've had 2 AstraZenecas, take a Pfizer. It doesn't matter if you had 2 Pfizers, take a Novavax. That doesn't seem to matter. World experience suggests that doesn't make any difference at all. You don't have to have the same 3. It's interesting. Sometimes they're actually saying that if you do have an alternate as your 3rd, you get better cover. But when that conversation starts, I'd all like you to seriously consider having the booster and your family. By then, the kids are covered. But I'm seeing that within the first 6 months of next year. I think it's certainly advisable. Al, ask me some more questions.
Yes, I'd just like to ask a question.
Hang on, we'll come to individual questions in a moment.
Oh, okay.
Al, just by the way, I have set aside 4 hours, so I don't want any of you to think there's not enough time to go through these questions. I'm happy into midnight, no worries.
I've got a coffee next to me, so I'm fine. So why did AstraZeneca get off to such a bad start in Australia? So compared to other countries, it's been essentially the only vaccine available, but there's been a real fight against using it. What's the background to that from your perspective?
The background
and is it any less valid?
No, the background to that, Alan, is what happened here for 5 minutes before we started. It became totally politicised, and politicised because of access to it. One of the most moving moments in my life currently was the standing ovation to the developer of AstraZeneca at Wimbledon this year, which I thought was just fantastic. This woman was congratulated. People stood and thanked her for the difference they'd made to their lives. And it was so much different to what was happening in Australia with the same vaccine. We were politicised. Through the Federation, we were politicised. Federally and state, they fought each other. We actually make this vaccine here in Australia. It's world leading. It's very effective. The small side effect that it had was known. I think that very clever campaign came out with 100 things that happen in your life that give you a greater risk of death than the clotting issues with AstraZeneca. It should have come out first. It was very funny, including driving your car, including having sex with your wife, including having a beer too late. There was any number of things were likely to kill you ahead of the 1 in 1 million chance of getting that side effect with AstraZeneca. Finally, when the chief health officers in some states actually were gagged and told to stop saying what they were saying, and the Prime Minister got his act together and supplies were running hot, and we had outbreaks in Victoria and New South Wales, which is always the push for vaccinations. Finally, the under 40s took it upon themselves, seriously, to get vaxxed with AstraZeneca, and they have successfully. We have, over the last 8 months now, managed to treat that particular clotting issue perfectly well. We're not losing, hardly anybody is dying with it now. They see their GP, the GP contacts the haematologist, they're in hospital for 3 days, they're back out, fixed. And we didn't do that originally, so we lost some people who succumbed to that particular side effect. That is no longer the case. The successful treatment of that particular side effect is dramatic, and people have voted with their arms. They've got vaxxed with it. My son-in-law's vaxxed with it. He took it on. He's 32. He took it on to be a role model to his mates down the golf club, and that worked successfully. There must have been 15 or 20 of his mates who got vaxxed with AstraZeneca, and that's what you need. You need a leader. You need someone who has assessed the risk, someone who's made a decision for the betterment of himself and his family. He's got a baby who's 12 weeks old. Yeah, AstraZeneca is now successful in this country, as it should always have been. There's a perception that it's false. And it is, if you're offered AstraZeneca, take it. If you're offered Pfizer, take it. But whatever you're offered that particular day, have the vax. When it comes to the booster, that also has some politics in it. The original research on Pfizer suggested that you have your second one 3 weeks later. I think as time has come on, you've got to remember that all the data is this year. So all the world data is this year, of which we're behind it because we've been having a stroll out of vaccination. We're learning a lot from overseas, but the overseas evidence now suggests that you can actually have your second Pfizer with maybe better immunity at 6 weeks, which is pretty much what we do with most of our vaccines. The moment that popped out, because we didn't have any supplies, then the federal government said that's the way it's going to be, because then you can have more people having firsts to start with a month or 6 weeks, and then 6 weeks later they can have the seconds, and by then we have more supplies from Poland, we have more supplies from the UK, there's a lot of vaccine swapping going on, and Australia is working hard to get those supplies. Where AstraZeneca is concerned, all the research showed 12 weeks. I was 12 weeks. For those in the stroll out, there was hardly any disease happening. Jude was 12 weeks. And my son-in-law's now at week 5, and allowing for the fact that when you have your second, you've still got to wait 2 more weeks till you get the effect of that vaccination. He has to decide when he wants his second one. Personally, he lives in Randwick, in the north part of Randwick, not down near MWBro. I think he's working at home. There's a stickler for the rules. I think he's a very little risk. I'd at least like to see him get to 8 weeks, and then 2 weeks after that, the 10th week, I think he has better cover. If we weren't having so many cases, I would have no hesitation to tell him to go to 12. But I think, there is some stress and anxiety in that age group. But I think 8 weeks, if you're not in a hot zone, would be preferable. You're in a hot zone, I think you take your AstraZeneca in 4 and you wait for your booster. Your differential cover would be, instead of 86% for 2 AstraZenecas with 12 weeks apart, you're probably going to be at about 70% if you are 6 to 8 weeks apart. That should last, though, to keep you well and out of hospital and not dead. That should last, looking at world evidence, at least 6 to 9 months. And as I said, within the first 6 months of next year, everybody's going to be offered a third, and my advice is to take the third. So there has been some politics in the rollout, the timing of the second injections, and trying to cover, it's a balance, trying to cover as many people as they could with limited supplies. Now, we are hopeful, as you can hear, Gladys and others, that October we'll have more supplies, and November we'll have more supplies. So the more they first vaccinate right now, the more it's likely the double vax 70% and the double vax 80% will be achieved into November. And that's what they're banking on.
I think also from my perspective of somebody who works in communications, there was certainly a lot of media stupidity in the way the whole aspect of the AstraZeneca vaccine was treated, that too much attention was paid on a very small risk.
How could you disagree? It goes on at the moment. At that 11 a.m. circus between the politicians and the media, it's just staged, surely. It just breeds anxiety, which we don't need at the moment. We need people to be very positive here. We are close to coming out of this very dark time, maybe not total freedoms, but very close to getting out of these times and getting a lot of our positives back in the way of family and friends and social contacts and common sense and looking after each other. But we're close.
So taking it back to a basic aspect of it, so if somebody is unlucky enough to contract the disease and it gets beyond the stage that it can be treated at home, what is the procedure that happens?
Yeah, I would like to know whether anybody has had family or friends that have actually had COVID out of the 107 now, goodness sake. Anybody come in close contact? Yeah. Passing friend or you heard about it isn't that common, and most of us live in yeah, Darren, yeah, you have, good.
Yeah, my fish shop owner fish shop owner's uncle died of the AstraZeneca for getting a blood clot in June or July 20 in the first lockdown.
we just weren't treating it around the world properly. That's very different now, and I'm sorry to hear for last year. So our particular personal encounter with COVID is rare, but I take you back to the fact that it is a respiratory disease. So you are going to have symptoms that just, that they're the common cold on steroids. So you're going to have the most horrendous headache, serious sore throat, cough, aches, fever, maybe a rash, maybe nausea, vomiting, maybe the loss of taste and smell. The whole thing can be reasonably treated at home. As you can see, there are 1,400 plus new cases today in Sydney, and all of those start off at home. A lot of them stay at home. They're well managed with Panadol, with fluids, and the occasional, telehealth to the local GP. A few of them, though, deteriorate rapidly, and you hear people died at home, and you go, how could that happen? It can be very rapid. This is a disease that can certainly overwhelm your immune system within 24 to 36 hours, irrespective of your age. But the advice is that you ring the GP, he or she at least assesses, and if you're sicker than that, you ring for an ambulance and get to hospital. So there are now over 1,000 people in the hospital system in New South Wales, and there are over 100 of those that are on ventilators. They are very ill, and the chances of their recovery are still very good. You can see by the number of people who pass away this year that those numbers are relatively low, but people are still very, very sick. They only get into hospital if you're very sick at the moment. The chances are, if you're only a little way sick, you're going to have to do it at home. If you get into intensive care, what's happening with the Delta variant is that you stay there longer. You might recover, but instead of being in there for a week, you could be in there for 3 weeks. It is a virus that once it's inside, it overwhelms you. It's much more contagious, and it gives you a much greater viral load for your body to cope with.
Greg, I've got a quick question. I've got a quick question for you, Greg. Sorry to interrupt you there. Yeah. This morning, the Premier was talking about, and I asked this as a parent, that children don't transmit to children. They transmit to adults, and they get it from adults, but they don't transmit to each other. What's your thoughts on this, especially when we're looking at a significant number of children in our community aren't vaccinated and are not able to be vaccinated? So how should we, considering that a significant number of New South Wales primary schools especially are going back to school on Monday, and as a teacher myself, I have this as a duty of care to my children and my students. What should we be looking for, and how should we be trying to protect the kids?
Yeah, Phil, I'm very sympathetic. Obviously, the 12 to 16-year-olds who are immunocompromised will get vaxxed as soon as possible, and then that whole cohort will get vaxxed, and the Year 12s hopefully have taken the opportunity to have the vaccine. The issue is, and it's a worldwide issue, when do we get around to vaccinating the babies to 12-year-olds? And my understanding is that next year that will be the case, that they will receive a standard 1/3 dose COVID vax, and they'll have a triple vax like normal, and we'll have those protected. I think the Premier's broad brush is not right. I think kids can infect other children. The fact is that most kids who catch COVID are asymptomatic. It is very difficult to determine who's got it and who hasn't. And that's also an issue. In relation to the classrooms, that is just going to be tough on you, Phil, and all the teachers. My wife's a teacher. It is a very difficult demand on you. You have to stick to the basics that keep you well. That's number one. Mask, hand wash. The kids don't jump all over you, not this time. You're going to have to determine some distances and boundaries, because that's how it is. Windows open, ventilation, all the usual things. The kids, I don't think the kids are too far off wearing masks. I think a lot of parents are quite happy to have their, maybe 8, 7, 8, 9-year-olds in masks to go back to school. They're very happy to have them educated, as we all are. Younger than that, probably not going to work. Keeping the kids apart is again, setting boundaries. You know, you try it, it's like herding cats with a 5-year-old. Unlikely to work, but you know, they're pretty used to washing hands, and they're pretty amenable to listening to instruction. I think they're just going to have to learn new skills at the moment. They won't be vaxxed for at least a year.
It should be noted that Phil is a teacher from New South Wales, regional New South Wales, and he's going back to school on Monday with a classroom full of kids. So his questions about concerns he should have about his boys are actually very real to him.
Oh yeah, no, don't doubt it. I live with it all the time, and Jude's always running things past me. It is not easy. Not easy on the kids, certainly not easy on the teachers. I'm pleased though that most of the union issues have settled, and that can be a problem with industries. There's been a lot of negotiation with the health unions, you know, like nurses, service people, ambulance, in relation to vaccinations. But a lot of that has been handled, I think, sensitively and sensibly. I'm sure the teachers have had the same sort of discussion as to whether they should or shouldn't be vaxxed. Hopefully they are all vaxxed themselves. But no care, set the boundaries, open the windows, everybody washes hands, teachers stay masked, no parents on the property, all the usual rules. And hopefully, as you can't pick a kid, most kids who are infected anyway, hopefully no adults actually catch it.
Getting a little contentious on this one, and I know I've seen commentary and debates about this on Facebook pages where it's gone absolutely ballistic, and that is the status of people who decide they are not going to get vaccinated. They have a belief they're not going to be vaccinated. I don't think anybody feels they've got it right, but from my understanding, the vaccination doesn't stop the spread of the disease. It simply means that you are better armed to combat it. Therefore, is there a problem with mixing vax with unvaxxed on the basis of whether it increases or decreases contagion?
Yeah. Look, I think everybody has an opinion on that. My general opinion is that society is, on most issues, divided 80-20. 80% go with issues and 20% have a problem with them. When it comes to this particular issue, then firstly, it does protect you from serious illness, hospitalisation, intensive care and death. And I think if you are clearly looking at it just for you, it's a simple decision, go and have a vax. There is, with world data, obvious changes to the infectivity and the case numbers and the chances of spreading it. That the more people who are vaxxed, the lower the numbers of that spread. And I think that's part of the reason that the UK had, you know, opening day when you and I were just astounded that 100,000 people got COVID that day, that 2,500 people died that day, and we thought, what on earth? But those numbers are very small compared to last year. And the more people that get vaxxed, the lower those numbers get. So there is protection for the general community as much as there is protection for you. And that's the reason that a lot of people get the vax for themselves, for protecting their own family and protecting their friends and community. And that's the reason we get vaxxed for anything. Seriously, it's why we all get a hepatitis B vax. It's why we all get a whooping cough vax. It's not that we're going to catch it, but if there's kids and babies hanging around, we don't want them to catch it until they're vaxxed. So most grandparents have a whooping cough booster, and they don't bat an eyelid. In fact, they line up ready to go. I very rarely hear young mums say, listen, there's no access to my child unless you have a whooping cough vax. Most grandparents do it anyway. And I think that's what we're very good at in Australia. We're good at vaccinations. We're good at being vaccinated. And we will get to 80%. I'm absolutely sure we'll get to 80% double vax. I'm not sure we'll get any further. I know Kerry Chant thinks we'll get to 90. Hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully we'll get to 90. We will get, because 90% double vaxxed is not across the whole community. Obviously, we're not talking children. That's 20% of our population. We're not even including in the equation. And 80% of adults may equate to being sort of 65% of the population only. We'll have a much more interesting conversation when we vax our children, because I think then we get to closer to herd immunity. And herd immunity means that there's not enough potential people to catch it for the virus to survive. So you don't need 100% cover, but a lot of viruses fade off if there's only 20% or 15% of the total population available to infect. It is not enough for them to run into regularly enough a person they can infect. So it tends to settle down. That's what herd immunity is all about. That's what we're trying to get to. When we immunize our kids and when we get to those high numbers across the community, we can get to herd immunity without vaccinating everybody. How that makes you feel next month when you head off into the pub, or you head off into your hairdresser, and look at some of you, you certainly need, like myself, to attend a hairdresser sooner. Hello, Glenn. Look at that. Magnificent. How you feel if the person next to you is not double vaxxed, or the waitress isn't double vaxxed, or those three people who just came in didn't even do the QR code because they're paying cash. I don't know how you're going to feel if you've gone to the extent of double vaxxing yourself because you thought it was an appropriate thing to do. And I certainly think it's an appropriate thing.
That leads into my next question is it a reasonable thing for venues, any kind of venue, whether it's a church, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a bar, dare I say it, whether it's a Masonic lodge, to say, for the building owners to say, you don't come into this building unless you're double vaxxed?
Yeah, listen, personally, yes, but I put a but there. The reason this has been tossed at us today is very political. It's a large sweetener. The government wants more people to be vaxxed. That's the next 6 weeks determination. Within this 6-week period, there'll be a lot of discussion about the nuts and bolts of that Clayton's announcement that Gladys gave us today. The only thing she told us was we'll be out of this on a Monday. That's all she said. She didn't tell us which Monday, but decisions will be made from the Saturday information she gets, and on that Monday, whatever day that is, could be the 18th of October, could be earlier, could be later, we don't know. So in the meantime, she's saying, well, you know, here, I'm dangling this in front of you, I want more vaccination, which is all she's saying. And then all the industry areas are going to get to in the next 6 weeks, whether it's tourism or whether it's restaurants, whether it's gyms, whether it's churches, whether it's local synagogue, it doesn't really matter. They're all going to have very close conversations, and what it actually becomes will be determined. So at the moment, the carrot is get a vaccination because we're going to give you freedoms. We just don't know what that actually means.
Greg, given your comment in relation to herd immunity,
This one.
there was a comment from someone on the Sunrise show the other day that said that no matter what is going to happen, didn't give a time frame, but said that everyone in Australia will at one stage suffer with COVID-19.
Yeah,
Do you have a comment in relation to that?
I agree with that. I agree with that. I fully expect to get COVID next year. I'll be in a restaurant, somebody will be near me, sneeze, I'll catch it. My vaccine will stop me getting any sicker than, I've got the symptoms of the coronavirus of a cold. And I might not even get symptoms. I don't expect to get sick enough to go to hospital. I don't expect to die. But I think most of us are going to catch COVID. And we just go, that's why I said how many people have had personal experience with it, very few. But I think there's no way we can dodge this. There are 1,400 cases in Sydney today, 1,200 yesterday, 1,500 tomorrow. These are thousands and thousands of people. And since it started, I think we're over 100,000 active cases in Sydney. I mean, it's extraordinary. Last year, we were worried about the 2 or 3 in hotel quarantine coming from overseas. It was the big thing. We've had 3 there and a donut day. Now we've got 1,500 a day in the community. We're going to catch COVID. there is no quiet little corner of Sydney that you can hide in, or maybe the country will last longer, but you know how easy the last 8 weeks it's got into the country. Some drug supplier got it into Dubbo and his networking got it out into Western New South Wales. Pretty straightforward. It took about 10 days. And that's not counting furniture removalists and who knows who else is carrying the thing. It's very easy to catch. You will catch it, but if you're vaxxed, you will probably just shrug it off with a couple of Panadol and stay at home for a few days.
I think the other issue on that is that, you know, probably for every person who's got it and been reported, there's been somebody who's got it who was asymptomatic because you just wouldn't know you got it.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Hey, Greg, why is it that there is so many medical experts that are against the vaccine?
Well, I'm not.
No, I'm not saying that you are.
People can have their opinion. I think if you look at the possibility of what might have happened without us even being at this level of vaccination, it would have been much tougher for New South Wales, as it was tough last year for Victoria. We have dodged many hundreds of thousands getting ill and much iller. We've dodged the health system being overwhelmed, as some of us can remember what happened last year in New York and other parts of the world. They were just dreadful scenes. So the vaccination is stopping that happening, and the health system needs to continue to function. We'll get onto that soon. In relation to ordinary disease, the sorts of things most of you have had or experienced in the past, we don't want a health system, a hospital system collapsing under the weight of COVID, when the rest of us would then have no opportunity to seek medical advice for ordinary disease. I'm very much in favour of vaccine for that major reason, keeping the health system open.
I think there'll be a time, and I actually think there will be, when it'll be decided that there's no need for the quarantining of people coming in from overseas, but they will be checked.
Well, I think so. I mean, most people coming from overseas are double vaxxed. We know that. They're well ahead of us. The chances of catching COVID in the streets of Sydney, you just have to walk around, you can't get into Bankstown, or you can't get into Fairfield, or you can't get into Liverpool because we're precluded from travelling in there. But the chance of catching COVID is enormous in Sydney. I've got to pause there, watching Andrew Stewart wandering around outside. Andrew Stewart, where are you wandering and how are you feeling about catching up as you walk past, mate?
There's hardly anyone here. Darling Harbour, Piedmont, around the city. There's 20 metres social distancing here between me and the next person.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Greg, walking Bankstown.
Greg,
well, you know what? I'll be getting my AZ tomorrow in Bankstown. I'll leave my city office, go to my Bankstown office, meet my client, and then jump across the road and get my AZ tomorrow.
May I ask a question, please?
Yes, Robert.
In relation to my children are in their mid-40s, and all their friends are in the same situation, and some of them have been sitting waiting for the Pfizer. One doctor in particular offered them AstraZeneca, which they refused. Now, I don't want to get technical on this. I'm just wondering, should they have not worried about the AstraZeneca, should they have taken the AstraZeneca? Instead of the Pfizer, could they have had the AstraZeneca?
Yes, Robert. As I said earlier, whatever you're offered at the moment, just take it. I think both of them are probably going to have a second vaccine in 6 weeks, either one. We know how to treat any of these very, very small side effects. And this year's death rate because of those is minimal compared to last year. Yeah, if they're offered an AstraZeneca, take the AstraZeneca. No hesitation with that. I mean, you know, different GPs are different. This is just what I say. So that's my advice. I'm not wearing, you know, Grandmaster's hat here. It's just a local GP with experience. I would say yes, have the AstraZeneca.
All right, thank you very much for that. I'll pass it on to the other young people that I know through them. I think that would be a good idea.
So let me, just for a second, Al, let me just have a look at what sort of treatments we can offer if you actually get COVID. Apart from Panadol, bed rest, fluids, if you're doing well at home, most of you, if you got COVID, you'd end up on steroids or anti-inflammatories fairly quickly. Cortisone, remembering that this particular disease is producing copious amounts of fluid, and your lungs are clogging up, and that's affecting your heart, the amount of work your heart has to do, your blood pressure, those sort of things. So the first thing they'll give you is steroids. They may even give you anti-inflammatories. Most of you have experience with that in relation to arthritis. It takes away swelling. So that is what we're trying to do, is you're trying harder and harder to breathe. We do have, and again, Australian research, I want you to think HIV. So one of my old colleagues, Dennis Wakefield, Professor Wakefield, who was the cleverest guy I ever knew. In medicine, just to divert for a second, he was in my year. By year 2, Dennis was married, and by the end of the course, he had had 5 children. I, at this stage, if I hadn't have studied some anatomy books, probably wouldn't have known what a woman looked like. But Dennis was just always ahead of us. He never got less than 100 in every exam he sat, which was usually 50% more than I ever managed to achieve. Just a fantastic brain. In 1984, he walked into the HIV pandemic around the world. He then led the research, associate professor by 32, full professor of immunology at St. Vincent's by 36. We owe so much to Dennis, who last year, strangely enough, retired. I rang him up and said, Dennis, this is unacceptable. You cannot retire that brain of yours. I can retire. I said, nobody's going to notice, but you, Dennis, have to keep going. He said, luckily, happily married, 5 children and about 30 grandchildren, but he was continuing to consult and write the books. And these books are just world-renowned. But the work we did in HIV and continue to do in this country, basically based on monoclonal antibodies, is how we fight active COVID. We determine which antibodies we can give you, and you'll get some monoclonal antibodies pretty quickly if you get into intensive care. We then use antivirals, which have been around for years. If you catch the flu and you're very sick, you would have been offered over the last 20 years antivirals for your flu infection, which are very effective in taking away most of the heavy symptoms, and most people feel more comfortable. And then you're given oxygen, and then you ventilate. So you can see that about 10% of people end up on a ventilator who came into hospital. As I said, only 2.2% now die, with the total number of cases versus last year, which was sitting at 2%, which is a huge reduction. And of the 1,400 odd who had COVID active today, at least 1,350 of those are at home tonight, being treated tonight. They won't go to hospital. They'll successfully recover over a 7 to 10 day period. Most of them can't quarantine successfully in their houses. Most of their families will contract it, and that's why we see continued numbers. The active translation to contagion at the moment sits in Sydney as a sort of plateaued 1.2. So for every case, it is transferred to 1.2 people. That seems to be holding. It was expected that our case numbers would go past 2,000 a day with that number at about 1.5, but it's holding at 1.2. If it starts to come down to 1.1 and 1, if it gets under 1, finally, we're going to head downwards pretty quickly. But at the moment, we're in this a bit of an unknown period, but the numbers are not continuing to spike, they're holding. But we have lots and lots of people now in Sydney and the regions who have active COVID, who are recovering.
I think that as we move on, it's fair to say we're going to have the world that's vaccinated and the world that's not. And this is going to be the whole thing on international travel. Do the airlines say that you have to be double vaccinated before you can travel? Don't they? And I think they all will. What do you think are going to be the parameters of international travel opening up? It's not a high priority for some, but certainly it has implications for international trade. And certainly within Australia, the different states that are at different stages, is it feasible they maintain barriers?
Alan, I think it depends on who you talk to. If you're talking to Alan Joyce, the Qantas are ready. You can hear the jets here in the morning. They're just warming up, ready to fly us everywhere. And the planes will be ventilated, you wear your mask. And it may be to start with that you'll have a double vaccine passport. But I suspect over time, as more people are vaxxed, that even that will lose some of the strength and importance. It won't for the moment. There are lots of countries now that accept people in, and they will grade a colour scheme like England does, depending on where you're coming from, whether you're orange, whether you're yellow, whether you're light blue. And those people, most of them are quarantining at home for a shortened period of time, depending on their infectivity. Some people coming into Britain now are quarantining for 2 days, having a test, other people 5. I don't think anybody's quarantining for more than 7, and they're all at home. I think the same thing will happen here. I have an interest in that, of course, because Harriet's thinking of coming home early December. She came home this year in January. She went through 14 days quarantine in a hotel. I don't think that will happen. She's double vaxxed. She will fly in, go home, have tests probably first day, third day, 7th day, and 1-2 days after coming out of home quarantine, because there's more chances of catching COVID in the streets of Sydney than there is from somebody coming into a hotel quarantine situation from overseas.
Greg, it's fair to say then that we're not going to actually get herd immunity, but what we're going to get is herd better resistance, because it's clear that, like a lot of other viruses, we're never actually going to stop it.
No.
But through continued medication, we've just got to accept we live with it, and which means surely the daily press conferences can end, the daily score charts can end, because it certainly doesn't happen with influenza.
Look, I only offer the MERS and SARS example, that if the virus can't infect enough people, the virus cannot live and gives up, seriously. Look, at best case scenario, that could still happen with coronavirus. We could seriously have not enough vectors for the virus to infect, and it cannot continue. That's what herd immunity is about. Whether we get there, I don't know, but it is important to vaccinate our children. We cannot leave 20% of them off.
Ask a question.
Yes, Josh.
Greg.
Josh, just 2 seconds. I'm not going to continue. I'm going to say, okay, we are going to open to questions. What I'd like you to do is, everybody's got a hands up function, put your hand up, and you then pop up at the top of the screen, and we can take you one by one, because if you all just yell at a question at once, it becomes a silly free for all. But I think it was Phil, because you kicked it off. Josh, wasn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay, Josh, you kick off, but I've already got 25 hands up in front of my screen.
I'll try and be quick, Greg, and forgive me if these are both a little bit political. First is more a statement, and that is, Greg, don't you think that ATAGI were particularly cautious in making the statement about the AstraZeneca side effects, and that created this crazy view? And I think it was an overcautiousness by the people on ATAGI that caused it. That's just a point of view. I don't know what you feel about it. And
no, Josh, you're right, but there's an overlay of politics. There's an overlay of supply. So, yeah, I think they could have done that. In perspective, just quickly, the Brits aren't going to vaccinate their children. They don't see any purpose. The Australians are looking at vaccinating their children. So there are ATAGIs everywhere, and they're all running personal country agendas. And that's the one we took. But I think it was political and supply driven. If they had a second chance, they'd have opened the doors and said, go and get a vax.
Thanks. Moving on now.
You're still muted, Josh.
Sorry, I'm going to Pietro, 32nd degree, lots of ranks after him, and looking like he's in a beautiful kitchen temple. Pietro, what's your question? And like me, you need to unmute. Press the space bar or hit Alt-A.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Good evening, all. I've got lots of questions.
I'm only going to allow you one, because there are lots of people behind you, and Greg is going to be quick in his responses so we can move through them.
Okay. Okay, so probably the best question to ask is how you can say that the vaccines are safe when you've got the day-in database that shows thousands of adverse effects, including death. How can you say that it's safe? There's no supporting evidence. There's no safety data. There's no 5-year minimum term for vaccine testing. There's none of that. Where's the data that supports what you say is that the people are safe if they get the vaccine, especially when we look at what's happened in Israel, where there's 95% of double vaxxed patients, 95% of the population is double vaxxed, and 78% of hospitalizations is with the double vaxxed. So what does that tell you?
Well, you would expect the hospitalizations to be double vaxxed if 95% of the population is double vaxxed. So double vax stops you from getting serious disease and death in most cases. We have two ways of assessing that. One is the MERS and SARS experience of 20 years ago, and current world data, which, as you say, is at maximum 12 months old. But in that time, what we're seeing is a decrease of serious disease, a decrease of contagiosity of that particular variant. And we'll have to pivot when we get another variant, and there are a couple coming, and we'll have to be careful of those as well. It's evolving, but the majority of people being vaxxed are not dying, and that's really why most people are getting vaxxed.
Thanks, Greg. I see on the screen, I've got Josh waiting for a question and Phil waiting for a question. Guys, you've already had a go, so I'm going to beautiful downtown Western Sydney and Bradley William Banderas Del Muns.
Hello. Hey, Greg. Good to see you again.
Oh, you too.
Just a quick, Nina and I, we both had a shot and wondered when the side effects were going to kick in. It's like, if they give us water, nothing's happened. We're a bit shocked. But be that as it may, I've got the question on when they do the tests and they advise, like in the sewerage and the like, they're detecting traces of it in various places around the state. My father used to work for the water board, so I know they do the meticulous testing they do on the water basins and the like. But how can they be certain then with they say what is a trace or components of COVID in the sewerage in the middle of nowhere, and but they haven't had any sort of no confirmed cases?
Yeah, look, two things. There'll be someone I'd never want to be, and that is a sewerage COVID tester. I mean, I really think you've got some psychological issues with your mother. I just would find that a very difficult business to be in. That being said, COVID affects all your cells and sheds itself in your urine and your stool. And you might be, and in most cases, totally asymptomatic, as a lot of people with COVID are. The problem is you go to the toilet, you excrete certain things, and that heads off to the sewage, and viral particles are determined. And that's what they're doing. And they're saying, well, it must be here somewhere, so please all go and get tested if you have the minimal symptoms, or just go and get tested. It's primarily an issue for low numbers. Otherwise, if you were doing this job in Sydney, it's everywhere.
To paraphrase a song, I'm not a COVID tester, I'm a COVID tester's wife, and I find that testing COVID is the pleasant way of life. Anyway, Brian Kramer, you have a question there somewhere.
Yes, thank you. Even if we get fully vaccinated, in all the members of our lodge, will it be safe to meet?
Yeah, well, it'll be dependent on the Grand Master of the day. The current Grand Master, I would say, is much more conservative and has done an excellent job being conservative, and we haven't managed to meet at all. I think the new Grand Master inherits a much more hopeful situation. And as I said at the beginning, I'm very impressed by the effectiveness of masking, social distancing, and sanitizing your hands. If the lodge had a good ventilation system, well, that's up for grabs, but it's certainly important to get some fresh air in there. and we're meeting on the 4 square metre rule, which we're going to have to, so everybody go and measure their lodges again, because maybe not everybody can squeeze in some of the lodge buildings that I know are out there. I think the first thing will be you have to be double vaxxed to come to lodge. Yes. I think that is going to happen, but within 6 months that might be lessened off as we reach those magical numbers. But I think to start with, the government's going to say that to us, and we'll hear that from Grand Lodge.
Bill Hahn from beautiful downtown Barham, 561. Come in, wherever you are.
G'day. Greg, I was just be interested in the chat on the side. I noticed there's a brother here, Nick Seaman, who says he's currently isolated he has a case of COVID at the moment. I'd just be interested if Nick and you had a conversation about it.
Yeah, we'd all be. Where are you, Nick?
Hi guys, how are you?
Nick, nice to see you. Come on, talk to us.
All right, so I got COVID on Tuesday, and I tested positive to COVID on Tuesday. Within the hour of testing positive, I started getting really fatigued, run down. Then the fever started kicking in, sore red eyes. So I got home, obviously started taking Panadol, Nurofen, and that continued throughout the night. The next morning, I followed through with Panadol and Nurofen. By midday the following day, I started feeling a lot better, but still fatigued. The fever's disappeared. And this is my 3rd day now, and I'm feeling fine. Energy's back, but I've still got to isolate, obviously, for another 12 days. Well, yeah, 11 days.
And Nick, the pertinent question is, are you vaccinated or unvaccinated or partially vaccinated?
I've had my first dose of AstraZeneca. I'm also an asthmatic, so I think that might have helped as well. I don't know.
I'm sure it has, Nick. Look, the fantastic to hear from you. And we, as a group, I'm speaking for everybody here, couldn't be happier that you're alive and well. The take-home message is that those that catch COVID don't have as good an immune response as double vaccines. So even though you've had COVID, when your time comes up, have the second vaccine, which is important. Any of your friends and family get involved in this? Were you able to ask?
Okay, so I've also got kids.
Yep.
And I think that I've caught it off my kids, which was like me and their mother are separated, and I think their mother passed it through the kids. So the kids came to my house and they had minor fevers it was probably a couple of hours. So the first kid had it on a couple of hours that night, and the following kid had it a couple of hours the following night, and then I caught it, but I got it a lot more severe than the kids. So the kids were able to brush it off within overnight.
Classic.
Yeah,
it's a classic story. I think it's going to affect lots of people, and it's just nice in this group to actually see one that's got through it. We're very pleased. But it's a story that you hear all the time. I mean, you would hear lots of your friends, neighbours who have come in contact with COVID and may have COVID. Yeah. Okay. Well done.
Thanks.
Pleasure, Nick. And I think I don't think there's anybody in the group here that doesn't have thoughts and they're not with you at the moment. Thanks for posting on the chat, and thanks for talking to us about it. Continuing through, Joe, you've had a go. Josh, you've had a go. Phil, you've had a go. Paul Bookman, you haven't had a go yet. Prolific producer of newsletters from the wonderful world of the southwest of Sydney.
Thanks, Alan. Greg, I don't understand the word asymptomatic. Can you just make it in more plain English, please?
Yeah, okay. So asymptomatic, and it doesn't matter we're talking virus or say, let's talk heart attack. So you've had a heart attack, but you didn't present with anything. You didn't get breathless, you get chest pain, you didn't collapse. It's not till you went to see your doctor who said, you know, you've had a heart attack, and you said, oh, I've had no symptoms at all. That's asymptomatic. COVID, you don't get your headache, you don't get a sore throat, cough, cold, aches, nothing at all. But when you do your antibody testing or your PCV or whatever you're doing, it comes back positive. You actually have it or had COVID, but you had no symptoms. And that's the problem. They're the infectious people who aren't ill, but have COVID. and they spread that very successfully without, they don't know they've even got it. Their body didn't produce anything to make symptoms.
Got it. Thank you so much. Nick, all the best, by the way.
Thanks, mate. You too.
Okay, running across the top of the list, and please, if you do have questions, just pop the hand up on the system. Going to Joe in Tukley. I sound like I'm Ray Hadley. Going to Joe in Tukley.
Greg, thank you for your insight. Really appreciate it. I asked you before, why is it that there is so many medical experts, professors and immunologists and whatever, that are against the vaccine? I mean, there are a lot of for, but there was a lot against, which is very unusual.
Well, most of them have their own reasons. They're all researchers. It's the question we ask government on a daily basis. If you watch the news, you'll hear 10 epidemiologists, depending on which channel you're listening to. They have their favorites. They'll come up in the morning or the afternoon or evening. We'll hear their reports. Some of them are in favor of this and not in favor of that. The government receives its information from a very select band that it trusts. And because of that, so most decisions are made with a few people in the room, not 100 people in the room. COVID is new. There's lots of people with opinions on it, and those opinions are only over a year's worth of research. But the majority of people are very much in favour of the vaccines for the reasons we've spoken about tonight, in decreasing symptoms and decreasing contagion. I think by far the majority. I think the silent majority in most cases of doctors, researchers and specialists support the vaccination for COVID.
And we now go live to Andrew Stewart, who's continuing his perambulation to the inner city. Andrew, what's your question?
Yes, back to Piermont. Thank you very much, Alan, for organising this, and Doctor, for your time. It's been great. I just got a quick question on mask wearing. You've said we're all wearing masks. You've mentioned double masks. As uncomfortable as already wearing one mask is, we're breathing in a lot more carbon dioxide. How is that going to affect us?
Yeah, look, I think these are the issues we have with double masking. I was listening today about someone who carries a carbon dioxide monitor with them when they go into a closed environment, such as a classroom, such as a restaurant, such as a gym. And if it registers a high enough number, they will leave that particular room. It's not well enough ventilated. This goes back to poor old Phil. He's not going to carry all these things with him as he heads off into the classroom. So yeah, it is an issue breathing through two masks. You couldn't do what you're doing, couldn't exercise, but you might be able to sit quietly in an enclosed space and have better safety, e.g. the bus, e.g. working in an office. Research is ongoing, but it's looking now at, in specific issues, managing with double masking.
Matthew, you haven't asked a question yet. All I know you as Matthew iPad 4. No, he's gone. Okay.
Yep. There we go.
Matthew?
We there? Hey.
We've got you.
Okay. Good evening. Matt McKenzie from Lodge Ku-ring-gai. Greg, thank you so much for your time tonight. Very informative. Question around, if you've been diagnosed with COVID and you've had it, and then you bounce out of it, do you still get the vaccine?
Yeah, the take-home message is yes. So your immune response to the actual virus is probably a third of your immune response to the vaccines. They're much more targeted and they'll give you a better immune response. One of the issues that we haven't looked at, I guess, that must interest you is the long COVID issue. So we've been talking about bouncing out, and that's exactly the experience of one of our brethren who's getting better at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
It appears that children who catch COVID have an increased risk of long COVID. And we've got any number of different ages who are obviously suffering from long COVID. And long COVID is COVID symptoms that enable you to get out of hospital, but then give you ongoing issues for, I think long COVID at the moment can only be regarded as 12 months. but I think there'll be those that have long COVID maybe permanently. This is an attack on your immune system and how your immune system responds. And it's not a guarantee, it's not age-related, it's not illness-related. We still don't know enough as to why some people get it and others don't. You don't want it. Obviously, the treatment I've got offered here won't help you with long COVID, but you'd probably be on steroids for the long term. And those will give you side effects. We know what they look like, the swollen faces and the urine issues and the tiredness. So long COVID is not something that you want to get. We just don't know what triggers long COVID, but we will in another 12 months, absolutely sure.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Moving to David Mason, one of our regulars on this little program that goes out once a week. David, you need to unmute if you're going to ask a question. David Mason, just
Yep, clicking the wrong button. Am we right now?
Yeah, hello, David.
Hello, how are you? Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Mudgee.
Good on you.
One of the questions or one of the pearls that was dropped tonight, we haven't, when we did our lodge safety plan to get registered and all the rest of it, ventilation was never an issue or didn't even come up. And you've mentioned it a couple of times tonight. And I just wonder, is in a lot of lodge rooms nowadays, particularly out our way, 20 metres by 10 metres would be a pretty big building. And we do the 4 metre rule. We get a few people in there and all we've got is a little Mitsubishi air conditioning unit. Are we actually complicating or setting ourselves up for some sort of problem with lack of ventilation?
Yeah, you are.
Sorry?
David, excellent question. I think you are. I think we all are. I think Grand Lodge was going to have to instruct us to somehow or other not tile the doors shut or open those upper windows. I mean, ventilation with the Delta variant is extremely important. And that's why you're encouraged at the moment to picnic outside, but not in your house. Everything outside is much safer. We will have some sport. We will have some enjoyment at beach, golf, it doesn't really matter. But lodges that are locked up, as they all are, I think are not acceptable. I think Grand Lodge needs to show us how important ventilation is and to give us a hand with resources and maybe manage that much better than it currently is. We haven't even had that conversation. It's a conversation for classroom, it's a conversation for your own house. I mean, I know it's winter, I wake up in the morning and I open the doors, get some breeze, get some fresh air into the place, you keep them open through a nice warm day. I think ventilation is critical to maintaining our health, especially with COVID.
Oh, thank you very much. I mean, turning the air conditioning off certainly going to please the secretary. But, I think we probably need to be talking about fans or the 2 doors for a start. And yeah.
Well, there's some good research now onto what sort of extractor units we need in classrooms, and Phil will be up on that. I think we need to have the same discussion for lodge buildings. They're not that expensive. They're very effective in filtering particles out of this air. And I suspect we need to invest in them. Cost of those at the moment, if you can get them for supply chains, would be no more than $200. They're not air conditioners. They're very much for viral particles and they will filter them. We may need to get them for all lodges.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, for some reason I lost my tab key. It's certainly an interesting issue, and it's been a feature of Masonic buildings, I think, built after the 70s, that they are enclosed rooms. I mean, Middle Harbour, Mosman, we're fairly lucky. We've got bloody great windows everywhere that cause us great trouble doing a 3rd degree during the summertime. We've been cursing them, but they might turn out to be our blessing from now on. But a lot of buildings, unless they've got a full circulation air conditioning system, if they've got the 2-stage ones, which has just got a recirculating system in the room, that's not bringing in fresh air, is it?
No, we've got to open up those shearing sheds and we'll have some meetings in those and just get on with it.
I have this vision of a large tent in Mudgee
We all miss the Mudgee Lodge room, let me tell you. We could go
Okay.
down to Lowe's Winery. They must have a spare room down there. Sure.
Keith King, coming in from beautiful downtown Narrabeen, or are you on your boat tonight?
Where's young Keith?
And you need to unmute, Keith. You need to tap the space bar, Control A, or click on the top.
Hello, Rosemary. Nice to see you too.
Yeah, Greg, I'd like to just ask a question. A lot of the poorer countries haven't been able to get the vaccine, and they've been using ivermectin instead, and they seem to be able to control it. What do you think about that?
Well,
would you recommend it to your nearest and dearest?
Sorry, I'm going to get in first. It's great if you're a cow and you've got parasites in your liver, but otherwise.
No, this is for Greg. This is for a doctor.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to say no, not at all.
You wouldn't?
No, I wouldn't.
Why is that?
Because
don't just say no, just say why.
I've had ivermectin or my kids have had it when they had worms.
Yeah.
An appropriate level and for treatment of worms, very effective. Treatment for COVID, no.
Well, it seems to be being capable in the poorer countries who haven't been able to get the vaccine. I just want to know why it was washed out of the scenario for remedies in Australia.
Well, there's just no evidence that it worked, Keith, here. Maybe it's an Australian strength that we have against it. I'm not sure, but
okay,
there's no evidence.
That's fine. That's fine.
The bigger issue is the philosophical issue of everybody in the world making sure that everybody gets the vaccine. I'm very cognizant of that, and those countries that can't afford it should not be not having it. I think that's the bigger issue for us to look at. How on earth do we get them vaxxed? We're about to look at third doses, and the rest of the world's doing that as well. They can afford it or squeeze it out of the manufacturers, but 2/3 of the world's not even getting a first dose. That's a big issue for everybody.
Yeah, but they've gone over to ivermectin.
Yeah, well, hopefully they do well, Keith.
I hope so, for everybody's sake.
So,
thanks, Keith. Robert Moore, I hear you there. I see you there.
There's my old mate, Robert. Robert.
I'm here.
Nice to see you, Robert.
Same here, Greg. How are you?
Good, good.
Greg, I've had both AstraZeneca vaccines, and the GP clinic that I go to, they did so within 6 weeks of first and second dose. Earlier on, you were mentioning that you don't really get immunity until a little later than that. I think you were saying either 8 to 12 weeks. Is that, do I consider myself not fully immune until I get to the 12-week stage? Is that what I detect from what you were saying?
No, it's a balance, Robert. The original advice was to wait 12 weeks to have your second, then 2 weeks after that to be fully covered, and that would give you 91.5% coverage versus Pfizer's 93%. The issue is one of this Delta variant. It might be, and the government and others, GPs are saying, listen, assessing your own risk depending on where you're living. And I'm not sure whether you're still out at Nepean or not.
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
Obviously, it's a hot LGA. If I was at Nepean, I would not have waited 12 weeks for the second. I would have had my second at either the 6 weeks or the 8 weeks, depending on how safe I was at home. And that would reduce my total coverage from 91.5 down to 82. And that's the personal assessment you must make dependent on your risk. I think perfectly appropriate out there to have had it sooner, and you'll have your booster by June next year. But at least you've got 80% coverage against serious disease and death. And no, you haven't got 91, but you're not going to get into hospital on 82, I can assure you. You'll be good.
Okay, thank you.
Guys, I do see Phil, Josh and David waiting there, but I'm giving first timers preference. So Owen Sandry, come in, please.
Hi, Alan. Hi, Greg. I know you've spoken already about buildings, and you have been to Lodge Wagga some time ago. That building being a massive lodge room, My question is about ventilation and carbon monoxide monitoring. That building in its current, with what you can remember the size of it, would that be well ventilated enough, maintaining a 4 square metre rule with only 30 people in that room?
Yeah, look, I think so, Owen. The carbon monoxide measuring devices are very cheap. I would have thought somewhere under $100 should get you a good one. The lodge should buy one, should monitor it. If it's holding in normal levels, just enjoy your lodge night.
Would you suggest that in the south as well, or just in the lodge room because of the ventilation issue?
Can you open your windows in the south? Can you get the airflow?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, yep.
Do that. Simple things, all right?
Thank you.
I remember the time we were out at Broken Hill, we had South Australia came up with the GM, myself, and there were maybe about, there wouldn't have been 15 people in the lodge room, the holds 400. Apart from the senior warden, though, everybody else was down at the east, and we probably wouldn't have passed the 4 square metre rule in that great big building, but it was a fun night.
Thanks for your advice, Greg.
Josh Heyman, come in, please.
There we go. Greg, to get back to what you were saying about the herd immunity and that 80% is better than 70% and 90 is better than 80. And I know that there are a lot of people who have concerns about the vaccination and are saying that they'd prefer not to have one. But if and you said that the majority of medical practitioners are in favor of the vaccinations. What concerns me is that the public health authorities are recommending it. They've taken a view that the vaccinations are good for us. And yet they are saying to people, well, if you don't want to have it, that's your business. You can take care of your own health. But yet they're allowing them, if they do get COVID, they will still take care of them. So if I refuse to have a vaccination and then I become ill and I go and knock on the door at a public hospital, they'll take me in with open arms and they'll give me a bed in ICU. But I've gone against their recommendations and not had a vaccination.
Yeah, I understand that, Josh. Look, I think it's one of the great things of living in a liberal democracy is you actually have a personal opinion and defend yourself against what you see as a threat. I just draw the parallel to smoking. Smoking is terrible, and we tell you not to, and we create a huge advertising campaign, don't smoke. But if you have smoked for 40 years and you come into the public hospital with emphysema and you're on your last legs, you're treated like every other patient. It's
but there's one, I hear that.
That's the cause of your emphysema, but it does not stop you getting treatment.
But the difference is here that, yes, there's passive smoke, which is bad for everybody else as well. But here, the people who are refusing or opting not to be vaccinated are making it so much more difficult for everybody else. 1,000 times more difficult than passive smoking.
Well, more difficult, yes, but you can see the number of people catching COVID aren't dying. They're living at home getting better, most of them.
Yes.
Not even getting into the hospital. I mean, COVID is COVID. I think we're going to have to learn to accept that and have that conversation. But as a doctor, I'm not going to look, if you're ill, then you get treated. It's pretty straightforward. What you've done personally is important to you. The government won't mandate it. There's no chance of mandating it. Even coming out of lockdown, they've allowed the industries and outlets to actually monitor who's been double vaccinated and who hasn't. That is a huge onus on those businesses who are all dirt poor at the moment. Nobody's been open for months. And they're going to be expected to knock people back. I just think that's going to be a really difficult conversation at the door of the pub. I just think it's going to be very hard. The government, in lots of ways, you might say, has abrogated that responsibility. But in a liberal democracy, they're never going to mandate it. Never. People are expected to assess their personal risk, be informed, make an informed decision. But if you get sick for whatever reasons, I treat you. That's the end of it. That's what I do.
I'm keeping an eye on the raging debate that's going on in the chat room, and I'll just leave that to do what it wants to do. But I saw Marco. Marco, you were asking, can you still ask a question? Come forward, unmute yourself, and please do.
Grandmaster, good evening.
Marco, you too.
I have a very simple question. Is there a medicine that can be taken to cure COVID? And if there is, why isn't it offered? I understand there is something called hexachlorophene, something like this, and something ivermectin. There's a few that I saw on the Jerusalem Post that Israel is using. Why isn't it offered to everybody? Why isn't it free? Thank you.
There is no evidence in Australia that they work, Marcus, and therefore we don't use them.
Thank you.
I wish we had something to use. Other than treat the symptoms, we can't get rid of it, no.
Thank you.
Phil, we got to you.
Thanks, Greg. Look, as a teacher of a significant amount of Indigenous and First Nations students, and now that we're seeing a lot of, especially in Western New South Wales, a lot of Indigenous cases of people, and I see now several elders from that Dubbo and further west area now not only testing positive, but being sick and some dying. What do you think is the way that we can look after our First Nations peoples to ensure that they're protected with some of the, the underlying causes of health that they have, especially in this time with COVID?
Look, I think everybody can catch COVID, so that's number one. Underlying illnesses certainly make it more likely, and most people in Australia over the age of 70 probably have between 6 and 7 major diseases that they carry around daily, and they're more vulnerable. Most of us are absolutely amazed that the 1A classification, which covered healthcare, which covered Indigenous, which covered our most obvious people, didn't receive the vaccines that we thought they were going to get, Phil. I mean, I can't understand why, one, they didn't receive them, two, why they weren't receiving information, country dialect, with their elders leading, with campaigns aimed at, and with poor Will Canio, who we just love and adore, is just battered with no housing services, with everybody living in whatever they live in, with COVID spreading. Why on earth were they not involved specifically by New South Wales Health and the federal government last year? I've absolutely no idea whatsoever. It's beyond belief that we're now battling that particular issue, that red flags didn't go up when the majority of the population here is at 40% plus double vaxxed, and they're sitting at 18%. How was that allowed to happen? I don't know, Phil. We're going to have to wear it. You're not going to get an answer. My mate's the health minister. He's going to blame someone. But we all are weakened somewhat because of that, Phil, and it certainly wasn't right.
Thanks, Greg.
Muting Al. I think it has a mind of its own.
It's all right. No, I've been looking at the other screen where this chat channel is raging away. Brethren, thank you.
Could I ask?
Yes, we can take more questions, please.
Yes, I'd like to ask another question.
Yes, Robert.
I live in live in a very close community in the street where we are, and we've been here some nearly 55 years, and we looked on as the elders in the street, and we have a few people that have breathing problems like emphysema, bronchitis, young fellow that suffered croup in his early years and cannot wear a mask, and they're getting a little bit embarrassed that they have one in particular, elderly gentleman that has the emphysema, says, I'm not going to get the shot. I'm a little bit concerned for him. As a Mason, I'm concerned for him. And the young fellow that's got a breathing problem that lives next door, I'm a little bit concerned for him too. But is there any way around it? They cannot wear a mask. because of their breathing problems? Is there
Oh,
any way around it, most worshipful Brother Greg?
The most obvious way around them is a face shield. Most of us wear face shields at work. You've probably seen them in hospitals where people wear mask and face shield. You can buy them at Bunnings. They're about $3 for 5. They very successfully sit on your forehead and they shield your face. And they don't cover you over. They're very simple to put on. There should be lots of resources at the local GP that you can spread around. You can certainly refer people to the New South Wales Health website for more information in case they're concerned. I mean, it behoves us all to assist and to offer as much backup and support as we can, but a face shield is a normal thing to do. Now, Al, can I just take the opportunity, because you and I ran a really successful men's health program once while we were much younger. That I just wanted to quickly touch base on being well. I don't want you to forget that you need, especially with some of you, regular checkups. I don't know how often you've been to your doc, how often you've had yourself assess the old pink slip idea of knowing your numbers, your weight, your blood pressure, your pulse rate, a finger up your bottom. Sorry, Rosemary. There are other things you need to have tested. All those sorts of things, your PSA, blood counts, what your testosterone is doing, check your urine. I want you to be as well as you possibly can so that being well can be a deterrent to catching COVID. That requires you to leave COVID for a second and either get a telehealth with your GP or turn up and say, it's my annual checkup, please. It's very important to remain well. It's very easy to sit on the couch and to shrink back into the dark and to say, it will never catch me. Other things will catch you. And that I don't want to have happen. It's extremely important that you look after yourself and your wives and partners and your families. General health is important. The incidence of cancers at your age, much more prevalent. The incidences of heart attack, of nutritional issues, learning to cook for yourself, exercise, osteoporosis in men and women, needing more exercise, needing the right diet, needing to consult at least a health specialist annually. That's important. Don't lose sight of it, because when COVID is under control and you're enjoying yourselves next year, I don't want something else to happen to you that you didn't know about, you weren't prepared. So the Men's Health notice and information doesn't lose any of its traction. It's probably more important now than ever. When I asked for a raise in show of hands, I'm surprised at the 20% only who've seen the doc in the last year. And normally they would go every year. And some of my patients out there, Marcus, it's always lovely to see you, might see me 52 times a year. It doesn't matter. Because I know that helps physically and it certainly helps mentally. Mentally, being fit is just as important. You need, as we do tonight, you need to relate to each other. You need to stop the COVID disruption of your connectiveness and your social cohesion. This is important tonight when we have a chat and get to say hello. But hopefully you're doing that in a not so formal setting of a Zoom with a Masonic nature, that you actually got family and friends who you keep in touch with. Today is Are You OK Day, of all days to run this. And I want you to ask yourselves first, are you okay? And I don't have to hear your answers, but I want you to ask yourself, are you okay? And good. And if you're not okay, then please seek some advice. And are the people around you who you love and adore okay? This is a day to remember that. This is not COVID issues. This is, are you okay? There's a lot of guys out there and families who are not, and has nothing to do with COVID. But there is hope. Even though Gladys is going to give it on small spoons, there is hope that, next year, early next year, you're going to enjoy yourself, get back to your usual things. But at the moment, just make sure you ask yourself, are you okay? And if you're not, go and talk to a mate, go and talk to somebody who knows what they're doing. So that's the basic story, which is not specifically COVID related. I just want you to look after yourselves and make sure that you're around, at least till the Brisbane Olympics. That'd be good. 2032.
Great advice.
Thanks, Greg. That's a good point to cease the recorded portion of what we're doing tonight. Thank you very much for spending the time with us. Thank you also to I think we peaked at 108 participants who took part. Thank you all for watching the session 3 of the Lodge Middle Harbour being Zoom Masons during the COVID period.
Can I ask one last question, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I'm not